I am Stacy Howes. I'm with the Maryland Healthcare Commission, and I am the Chief of Long-Term Care Quality Initiatives in the Center for Quality Measurement and Reporting.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jean Marie Gao, and I am currently acting as the CON Director. CON Chief.
Congratulations, Jean
Yes.
Marie.
Oh, thank you.
Ben Steffen, Executive Director of the Maryland Healthcare Commission.
Joe D'Amatos with HFAM. John Spadara with Future Care.
Julie Beard with the Center for Quality Measurement.
And on the
And on the phone.
work group members on the line, why don't you go through them first? Can you just, I don't think we need everyone to introduce themselves.
Well, I was just going to read their names.
Yes, I would say.
And on the line, we have Ann McKay, Paul Miller, Anna Palmisano, Dane Sacco, Commissioner Marsha Boyle. Having trouble.
Paul Miller.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with this. Sandy Rosenberg, Andrea Nunez, C. Boyd, Catherine Victorine, Aaron Davis, Heather Reed, Hope Morris, James Buck, James Forsyth, Kevin Hefner, Linda Colt, Lisa Simpson, Paul Miller, Pamela Beidel, Stevan Ellis, June Chung, Joshua Auerbach. Did I miss any? I don't think I missed anyone. And then we have someone with the last 4 digits of their phone number is 4775. Who was that?
Very good. And then we have several people in the room as well.
Howard Summers.
It's
Howard
Kristen
Sala.
Nay at OHCQ.
Thank you, Dr. Nay.
Winnie Hawk with the Maryland Healthcare Commission.
Bonnie DePietro, Maryland Patient Safety Center.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Maryland Healthcare Commission.
Thank you. Has anyone else just joined?
Yes, Claudia Baylog, 1199 SEIU.
Thank you. Sarah Hemming.
Shelley Martin from the Attorney General's office.
What was that name again?
Shelley Martin from the AG's office.
Thank you. Okay. Randy Ames. And anybody else? All right, thank you. All right, so again, welcome. Today we're gonna review the bill that we've all been called here to talk about. We will go over the timeline for the work group, and we will also go over the work plan. And the final report is due for this work group on December 1st of this year. We'll then review the current federal and state initiatives and how nursing home acquisitions impact quality. And then we have a guest speaker, Heather Reed from the Office of Healthcare Quality, who will go over the process of nursing home acquisitions through the Office of Healthcare Quality. And then we'll review the state health plan, which outlines our authorities here at Maryland Healthcare Commission. We'll make sure we have some time for discussion and comments and go over the next steps.
Stacy. Ben would like to say a few words.
Yeah, so first off, I want to welcome our work group members and our other stakeholders who are attending. This is going to be, it looks like a pretty well attended work group. I know there's been a lot of interest in in this particular topic as the whole issue of private equity has gained a lot of attention both here in Maryland and across the country. And certainly there's recognition that the interest in private equity firms in the healthcare sector more broadly has gathered quite a bit of momentum. I think that what we were going to try to do is we do have stakeholders and work group members. We will try to, during the meeting today, when there are questions, ask that work group members only ask questions. And then we will pause after each presentation to give stakeholders that are here a chance to also comment. I realize there's a lot of interest, and I don't want to limit the conversations today as we get started to just work group members, because I see from who's attending that we have an enormous amount of expertise, not only from the healthcare sector, but from the AG's office and elsewhere on this particular topic. Let me go through the mechanics. I think we're now 3 years into the pandemic, and most of you have been exposed once to Zoom. The best way, if you're on the phone, to comment is to raise your hand. We will be monitoring that here in the room. You can also pose a question in the chat feature. That is secondarily preferred. And lastly, which I want to discourage, is to shout out a question. It can get kind of disruptive if everyone does that. The first person who does it, it works fine. If you have 4 or 5 people talking, it becomes a little bit more difficult. And we have several staff people here in the room that will be monitoring both the hand raising. We can't see it that well from watching on the monitors here, but we do have someone that is monitoring from her own laptop, so we should be able to see that. I also want to thank Jean Marie and Stacy for agreeing to chair this work group. Other senior members of the staff will be attending throughout, but our 2 experts on the nursing home industry are really well equipped to chair this meeting. One from the perspective of our health planning function, the other from our nursing home quality activities, which are some of them the first quality reporting initiatives that the Healthcare Commission undertook in the provider space. We did do HMO report cards prior to the launch of the nursing home initiative in about 2002. So we've been in the area of quality reporting for some time, and I think we have some good expertise in that area too. So welcome everyone. I'll look forward to 4 or 5 meetings that really allow us to move forward on some of the challenges the industry is facing with acquisitions and with the access to capital as well. So I yield back to our co-chairs. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So the work group charge. So the purpose of this work group is to look at the current role of MHCC in working with nursing home acquisitions and how acquisitions impact quality. The work group also is charged with making recommendations regarding the breadth of MHCC's authority over acquisitions and whether or not more time is required for us to complete our acquisitions reviews. The work group will look at 2 main areas related to acquisitions that are impacting quality of care: private equity and multi-bedrooms.
Okay, State Bill 509, summary and requirements. Maryland Healthcare Commission will provide its recommendation to OHCQ, requiring the Secretary of Health to consider this information before taking certain action regarding licensure of a nursing home. MHCC's evaluation shall include quality ratings for all facilities currently and previously owned in and outside of Maryland, evidence of a quality assurance program, committees that meet at least quarterly, inspection reports, licensing surveys, lawsuits, tax ID number, Medicare, Medicaid certification number. Applicant shall include anyone with ownership interest in the facility and its ability to comply with medical care, nursing care, financial conditions, and other applicable regulations. Based on the findings of the Maryland Healthcare Commission and OHCQ, the Secretary of Health may approve or deny or revoke a nursing home license or impose conditions on a nursing home license. By December 1st, 2023, MHCC in consultation with other stakeholders will assess the elimination of rooms with more than 2 beds and any other issues that are related to acquisitions of nursing homes.
Okay, so now that we have an idea of what the bill says, we have designed a work plan to keep us organized. The first step was to develop the membership of this work group and make sure that we had a good representation of different types of stakeholders. We have done our best to make sure there's good representation, but there's a possibility that additional people might be added later. Number 2 is we identified all of the resources that we could at this point. The first was previous nursing home studies done by MHCC, previous nursing home studies done at the national level and by other states. And also we have some data that we started collecting in 2019 on nursing home acquisitions that we'll share with you. And of course, there's just the state health plan chapter that we will use. Here we have a tentative meeting schedule, and I highlight tentative. This is approximately when we'll want to meet. Please keep an eye on your email and your calendars for meeting invites once we're ready to set the next meeting. And as I said before, the final report is due December 1st of this year, which means that we need to present our work and recommendations to the commission in either October or November. So clearly this is a very tight timeline. Are there any questions about the work plan? So before we dive in, I have a few pieces of information I want to share with you about the current state of the nursing home industry. In Maryland, we currently have 224 facilities, 27,910 certified nursing beds. We're at approximately 77% occupancy, and we have over 9 million patient days. 62% of nursing homes are owned by chains and 2% are hospital-based. And of Medicare patients who are discharged from the hospital to a nursing home, 19.3% are readmitted to the hospital within 30 days. 74% of the nursing homes in Maryland are for profit. 24% are nonprofit and 3% are government owned. And 64% of nursing homes, their primary payer source is Medicaid. 17% the primary source is Medicare, and 19% are private or other as their primary payer source.
So a question, how does, if I had instead of payer source revenue, I instead use days, how would that differ?
I can look that up.
Linda, Cole, do you have that off the top of your head? I think that's important because the share of days and the share of revenue are slightly different, and basically it's going to demonstrate that Medicare reimbursement is going to be more favorable. That is, we're going to see that the Medicare share of days is less than the Medicare share of revenue, and the Medicare and the private pay share of days is also going to be smaller than its share of revenue. So it gives you kind of a proportionality on payment levels between the major payer sources, Medicare, Medicaid, and the private pay market.
Really good points, Ben. I was just gonna refine that a little bit, right? So everybody involved in the work group knows that the majority of the days are Medicaid, and you have fewer Medicare days, but at a higher per day rate. I think this will be really good level setting exercise for everybody that private pay is a very minuscule on average percentage. People always sort of assume there's a bunch of private pay. There isn't. The one thing that I wanted to be sure to add that is definitely sort of a pandemic phenomenon in Maryland that's out of the norm. And that is that we've seen an increase in the Medicare managed care days compared to Medicare fee for service. And that again will impact the revenue as well. So I think it's an important distinction.
And although I don't want to overcharacterize this, in general, and this is based on national data, not something I've gathered from Maryland in particular, but generally Medicare Advantage plans, which is what we're talking about here, are going to be paid not as favorably as the traditional Medicare in terms of SNF reimbursement. And that has implications in Maryland because, as most of you know, although Medicare Advantage market share is growing, it still is less than the nation overall. Nationally, CMS now reports that about half of the Medicare population is covered by Medicare Advantage plans. Here in Maryland, we have about 245,000 Medicare beneficiaries in Advantage plans, which kind of translates into about a 25%.
Yeah, it's much lower, much lower here, but it's growing. And as you point out, it's a lower amount of payment and a lower length of stay. So.
Thank you. Linda, what
hold
Linda
on.
was trying to say.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, it's about 60% of days Medicaid.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
We have a question from Pamela Bedell, which is, are the
Vital.
private,
Senator Vital. Yes.
oh, sorry, Senator Vital, beg your pardon. Are the private pay patients paying a greater share to make up for the Medicare and Medicaid patients?
Generally, they're paying what the market will bear in the market that they're in. So I wouldn't characterize it in that way. I'll let John Spadero reply, as a provider. But if you're operating a skilled nursing and rehab center, you're wanting to look at two things. What are your specific strengths in terms of what type of quality care that you provide? So what's the sweet spot for you? Not everybody's good at congestive heart failure treatment or renal treatment or vent treatment. So first, your niche clinically. And then the second thing is, what is your payer mix, right? So it's about how much Medicare, how much Medicaid, how much Medicare Advantage, and how much private, all blended together. So it's not so much that the private are paying, it's that the blended rate relative to your clinical expertise are what sort of pays. What would you add to that, John?
No, I think that's pretty accurate, Joe. I mean, it's not.
Probably a little louder.
Oh, I say,
Your
I think that's
outside
fairly
noise.
accurate, Joe. Sorry. It's not, it's really based on, as Joe said, what the market, would bear in a particular area,
Other work group member, since we paused here briefly, other questions? I think we have one stakeholder question.
We have a request that when people in the room speak, can you please identify yourself? They can't really see us on the screen. Thank you.
So we have Howard.
Hi, Howard Solomon from Baker Donaldson. Private practice. One thing just to bear in mind is when you're talking about private pay, you're talking about two subgroups. The vast majority of private pay are individuals who are in the process of spending down limited assets, who are, in a sense, aspirational or tracking after a month or two towards Medicaid beneficiaries. So don't think of private pay as people with the resources who are going to pay privately indefinitely for a length of stay after Medicare benefit. There are such people, but they are a fraction of a fraction. So apropos of the senator's question relative to cross-subsidization, to the extent the private pay rates are higher, all that really has the effect of doing, they have to meet market conditions, as Joe D'Amato said. But that just accelerates the point at which they transition to Medicaid. So I think, don't think of private pay as kind of
Sure.
affluent people.
Thanks.
Good point, thank you.
Okay, background in federal initiatives.
So, yeah,
This is Jean Marie. Now. Our long-term care chief, Linda Cole, actually presented some information on private equity to the commission about a year ago. And so these next two slides are really building off of her work and updating some information that she's already shared. First, MedPAC in 2021 found that private equity firms own about 11% of nursing homes in the United States. The Journal of American Medical Association suggests that private equity nursing homes provided somewhat lower quality long-term care than other for-profit providers. CMS in 2022 began to release self-reported data on nursing home ownership changes, including profit status and names of individual, organizational, and chain owners. A White House fact sheet from 2023, nursing home residents are 11.1% more likely to have a preventable ED visit and 8.7% more likely to have a preventable hospitalization.
so I think there's something missing there.
Private ownership, right?
Right, what
Yeah,
are you saying?
equity ownership.
You're saying that individuals who are in nursing homes owned by private equity are 11% more likely? Is that there's
Yes.
something missing there?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
The Government Accountability Office found that the CMS database does not allow consumers to easily identify relationships among ownership and requires more transparency. So if you were to have gone online to look at CMS Nursing Home Compare 3 years ago, the information that's on there now there certainly is more information on there, and you are able to search across owners of nursing homes. However, what the GAO found is really that from the perspective of consumers, that information is not transparent enough, that it's not consumer friendly, that it's not easy to use, not easy to access. CMS in 2023 put on the Federal Register a proposed rule that nursing homes would be required to disclose expanded ownership they are currently providing. The rule would also define private equity, and they have this REITs on here, which is real estate investment trusts. Comments on the proposed rule were due in April of 2023. If it becomes a final rule, it will take effect 60 days after the final ruling.
And that final rule has not come out yet.
Correct. I've been checked. Okay, moving on to state initiatives. The Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation for Acquisitions from the years 2016 to 2021 in Maryland, we ranked 5th in the nation with 33% turnover of nursing homes. Currently, OHCQ uses civil money penalties from non-compliance to fund healthcare quality grants programs. OHCQ has a CHOW, which is a change in ownership dashboard, and we're going to be hearing more about that from our colleagues at OHCQ.
We have a question from Cindy Rosenberg.
Oh, okay.
Delegate Rosenberg?
Okay, if my microphone working?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, why do we rank 5th in acquisitions? What are the, what are the circumstances? What is your sense of why that is the case?
So I think we have not done a systematic study of that, but what factors we think contribute are the relatively, compared to especially neighboring states, low Medicare Advantage penetration, which for operators means they won't be discounting their rates for Medicare days below what traditional Medicare pays. The relative, now, everyone has, kind of operates on the theory that Medicaid reimbursement is inadequate. But the reality is Medicaid reimbursement in Maryland tends to be higher than Medicaid reimbursement in neighboring states, making it more attractive and more predictable. And I think lastly, and this is probably a factor that doesn't come into play too much, is that Maryland is a high income state. So there is a certain percentage that are paying out of pocket. We've heard already why that is. Some people are spending down, but the reality is that the duration that they're using their own resources versus other similarly positioned patients in other states probably are a bit larger. These are not systematic findings. It's kind of what MHCC has heard from our commissioners that represent or are operators in the nursing home industry, conversations with operators, but certainly not a well-grounded, academic study at this point. But I think
Understood.
we kind of catch them on. I'll also yield to anyone else in the room who has other explanations, because there's probably a few other factors as well.
Hi, Howard Song. Just anecdotally, there have been a number of ownership changes in Maryland where you have multi-state providers who are exiting the business across their entire portfolio across a number of states, and they have facilities in Maryland that are just part of that. So it may not be specific to Maryland, but it'd be part of a multi-state shift in that company. And there's been some of that in Maryland.
And Genesis is the operator that comes to mind, which is completely divested itself from ownership of nursing.
And they're not the only one. It's just been a recent phenomenon that,
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. The Maryland Healthcare Commission must be notified on a timely basis of acquisitions of healthcare facilities. This includes any transfer of stock or assets that result in a change of the person or persons who control a healthcare facility, or the transfer of any stock or ownership interest in excess of 25%. The state health plan regulations add nursing home specific requirements related to acquisitions of nursing homes. And the Maryland Healthcare Commission nursing home acquisitions are reported monthly to the commission.
Thank you. So next we have some information from Heather Reed, who is the Deputy Director of Long-Term Care at OHCQ. Are there any questions before we move to Heather? Heather, are you on the line?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning. Whenever you're ready.
So, and here we will advance slides for you. So go ahead, Heather.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm here. I'm going to go over our process for nursing home change of ownership. So we can get started. Go to the next slide. Okay. Just the disclaimer first. Any of these views expressed during this webinar do not constitute legal advice and should not be relied on as such. Participants must consult the applicable statutes and regulations and seek legal advice from their counsel, who can provide assurances about whether the information in this webinar is applicable or appropriate for that participant's particular circumstances. Next slide. This slide is just a visual representation of all the different stakeholders and groups that have an impact on Maryland's nursing home residents. As you can see, there's a lot of spokes on this wheel. So we have everything from the nursing home provider themselves, the residents, family and friends, our office, the ombudsman office, MHCC, local health departments, Medicaid, all these people have a part in the safety and quality of care of Maryland nursing home residents. Next slide, please. The Office of Healthcare Quality is the agency charged with monitoring the quality of healthcare and healthcare facilities and community-based programs. Nursing homes are one of 47 industries overseen by OHCQ. Our mission is to protect the health and safety of Marylanders and to ensure there is public confidence in the healthcare and community delivery systems. Next slide. Now I'm just going to talk a little bit about our we have an 1864 agreement with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services that has designated, and the Maryland Department of Health has designated OHCQ as the state survey agency. The Social Security Act mandates the establishment of federal minimum be met by providers and supply in order to participate in the Medicare Medicaid programs. In this context, providers or patient care institutions such as hospitals, hospices, nursing homes, and home health agencies. Suppliers are agencies for diagnosis and therapy rather than sustained patient care, such as laboratories and ambulatory surgery centers. Next slide, please. So at OHCQ, we make recommendations to CMS regarding provider certification. A certified provider is authorized to participate in and seek reimbursement from Medicare and Medicaid for services rendered. The applicant for a CHOW must contact CMS provider enrollment and follow their instructions to become certified. Next slide, please. So OHCQ has dual roles in nursing home oversight. We have the federal role from CMS to us, and then for recertification and certification and recertification activities. The Maryland Department of Health, Secretary of Health designates to us the licensure and relicensure activities. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the website so we can, we'll get up to going over to the CHOW dashboard here. So on our website, in the top left-hand corner where you see this red arrow, you can click on programs, which will then lead down a whole list of all the programs that OHCQ has. Some might be listed twice, that might be listed like long-term care for nursing homes, or might be listed under nursing homes. So you can refer to them by different names. Next slide, please. So once you get to the long-term care program page, in the bottom left-hand corner is the change of ownership. So where that red arrow is, you can see if you press on that button, that'll take you to our CHOW dashboard. Next slide, please. So this is an example of what our CHOW dashboard looks like. We have all the application requirements, all the required forms. We have links to Maryland Healthcare Commission, transmittals, links to resources, everything that you need to submit a CHOW. You can see right in the middle there, submit a CHOW application. That's where that's what can be used to submit the CHOW application. And at the bottom, we have a list of all the change of ownership since 2019. Next slide, please. This is the bottom part of the CHOW dashboard that lists all the change of ownership. So this is updated every time we issue a new license as a result of the CHOW. Next slide, please. So they talked earlier about the percentage of CHOWs that happen in Maryland, and this slide here can show you the increase in the number of CHOWs that have happened since 2019. For fiscal year 23, we had 31 CHOWs, and we have 11 CHOWs right now that are still pending. Next slide, please. And this is just a graphic representation of how many completed CHOWs we've had per fiscal year. And as you can see, we're on our way up. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to go over our nursing home CHOW application. As you can see at the top here, we have instructions that tell you exactly how this form needs to be filled out. It also has required attachments listed on this part of the application. Next slide, please. So for requirement for a license, a person may not establish, operate, or continue the operation of an existing comprehensive care facility or extended care facility without first obtaining a license from OHCQ. Next slide, please. So for the submission of an application for a license, the application must be typed. We used to accept handwritten applications, but we have changed that now. And if they're handwritten applications, we will be returning them to the applicant. The application should be submitted at all required attachments electronically through our long-term care ownership dashboard. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to go over what the COMAR says about a sale, transfer, assignment, or lease of a nursing home. If the sale, transfer, assignment, or lease of a nursing home causes a change in the person or persons who control or operate the nursing home shall be considered a new nursing home, and the licensee shall conform to all regulations applicable at the time of the transfer of operations. The transfer of any stock which results in a change of the person or persons who control the nursing home, or a 25% or greater change in any form of ownership interest, constitutes a sale. Next slide, please. For the purposes of life safety code enforcement, the nursing home is considered to be an existing nursing home if it has been in continuous use as a nursing home, and waivers may be granted under COMAR 10.07.02.03G. Next slide, please. So these are the required forms that have to be submitted with the CHOW application. Of course, there's the CHOW application itself, the nursing home ownership, the ownership of property. There's a disclosure form, the director of nursing agreement, medical director agreement. There are two forms that we that are actually CMS forms that are also have to be submitted at the time of the application. One is the 671, it's the long-term care facility application for Medicare and Medicaid, and then the 1561, which is the benefit agreement. Next slide, please. So these are the parts of the nursing home CHOW application. So we have the instructions, and then we have 5 different sections: general information, administrator information, leasing arrangement, services, and then an attestation. Next slide, please. So under section D, services, this is where we get into how many beds the facility has, what the breakdown is, if they have single rooms, double rooms, and you can see on here that what has to be entered is the floor, the unit name, what type of room, whether it's a single or duplex room, then the bed numbers, and then the total number of beds for that floor. The other part to this is if the facility already has a respiratory care unit or a dementia unit, those beds have to be added in here, identified and added in here as well. Next slide, please. So on section E, the attestation, this must be signed by the senior officer or any other senior official and a second official if any. Next slide, please. This is the top of the nursing home ownership application. As you can see, the demographic information, the legal name of the business, they're doing business as or trade name, address. Then also they have to indicate the type of control, whether that's government control, proprietary, nonprofit. This is all information that's gathered in the first section of the application. Next slide, please. So there are 4 types of ownership. There's sole proprietorship, limited liability company, partnership, and corporation. This also has to be indicated on the application. Next slide, please. So the required information are the resident agent's name and contact information, the full name, address, business phone number, and percent owned for each member, owner, or investor directly or indirectly owning any part of the applicant. Every owner, regardless of the percent owned, must be included. So it doesn't matter if they own 1% or 0.5%, all of their information has to be included in the application. Next slide, please. So when we talk about corporations, there are different types: stock, non-stock, or closed. They're for-profit or non-for-profit. They have to list the name and business address of every member of the board of directors. If the governing body is not the board of directors, they have to list the full name and business address of every member of the governing body. Next slide, please. Also included in the application, they have to list the ownership of property, real estate, and equipment. It's the same type of thing. They have to, as you can see, they have to identify any management company that will operate or contract with the applicant, and who's the ownership of the equipment. Next slide, please. So though we have mandatory disclosures, they have to disclose the ownership of real property, the identity of any management company, as we just said, and the ownership of equipment. Next slide, please. So this is our disclosure form. There are several questions here that they have to answer. And then if they answer yes, they have to provide information regarding that disclosure. Next slide, please. As you can see, so these are some of the mandatory disclosure questions. We ask them if they have, if the healthcare facility provider currently or previously owned, operated, or managed by the applicant or an affiliate been the subject of any enforcement action during the past 5 years. These things include denial of payment, suspension or revocation of license, actual proposed Medicare or Medicaid decertification, bans on admission, civil money penalties, fines, restrictions of license, or placement under a monitor receivership. We also ask if the parent company owner or officer currently own or operate a health-related facility or agency. Next slide, please.
Heather, this is Ben Stefan. On if there is a affirmative on a revocation of a license or a decertification, what happens if someone says, yes, that's happened to me? What are the steps?
So if it's a revocation of a license, these are things that all have to be reviewed, and then we collect that information. It's not depending on what it is that they are saying, then maybe then licensure can depend on some of those things. But for most of it, as it stands right now, this is just information collected.
Thank you.
Yep.
I also have a question from Delegate Rosenberg. Is there a review comparable to the child process when a nursing home is creating or building a new facility or rehabbing a structure which has not been a nursing home?
So
Marie, why don't you?
yeah, no, I can answer, and please jump in when I can answer, and please jump in if I'm missing something, but actually we just had this scenario recently. But in this scenario, we would make what's called a determination of coverage as to whether or not a certificate of need is needed. A certificate of need review would be needed in this scenario. And the one that we just completed in that example, it was not needed. So that's the process.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, the process is outlined in our, in the board, in the commission's procedural regulations, and it can be an exemption from certificate of need. It could be a determination of coverage. It just depends on the factual situation. But yes, we do take a look at what scenarios would require a CON, an exemption, or determination. And I don't have those in front of me, but I'm happy to send that specific information on those different sections.
And, you know, I think it's appropriate now to say that there is one trigger on quality that that has, you know, been an issue of ongoing debate that applies to new constructions, modernizations, et cetera, which says that a operator has to demonstrate that 70% of the facilities owned for more than 3 years are 3 stars or higher. Those requirements don't exist on acquisitions. We have shared that information over the last year and a half with commissioners. And it's probably fair to say that, you know, we are rethinking that requirement, how it might be nuanced, because in some ways, this star rating requirement, while I think it's aspirationally appropriate, the fact is that in 2023, with just coming out of COVID-19, many operators are challenged to meet that demonstration, which means they are not eligible for a certificate of need. Certainly, the commission and the commission staff, when we established this in 2018, and I would note there's a good bit of industry comment at that time. There was never an intention to establish any sort of moratorium. It's fair to say that there's no actual moratorium, but many operators expressed frustration about wanting to improve a facility, but being barred because of the 3-star requirement.
Really good points, Ben. There was a lot of discussion, you remember, of us changing this requirement as it applied to additions and such right before the pandemic. Just additionally, one point that you bring up about, you know, we're going to be living with the ripple effects of the pandemic for a long, long time. And one of the ripple effects that we're experiencing now is that in many instances, an annual full survey of a nursing home, not the infectious disease surveys that we did during the pandemic, but the regular annual. There are many of them that have gone 2, 3, 4 years without an annual visit. And obviously there's more for the regulators to look at if there's been that long period of time. And when there's more to look at, there are sometimes more deficiencies. Now, it could be a bunch of deficiencies that are relatively low on the pecking order, but more because you haven't had a full annual survey in 1, 2, 3, or 4 years. And that is disproportionately impacting the star rating system more than a normal annual process would, absent the survey. Absent the pandemic. So.
Yeah, and this is going to be a topic that we'll be discussing as we move through the work group sessions, but I think it's important to emphasize that quality is extremely important. How we implement that in a CON process is important to implement, but also to assess, is it achieving our aims that we established when those standards were were initially implemented. So more to come on this. Hold your comments if you can.
Commissioner Boyle has her hand up.
Thank you. You may be getting to this, so just tell me if I'm being premature on this question. But as far as new licensures, how many, what percentage are approved? What percentage are denied? And as far as denials, why are they denied? And how many then are turned around? I'm curious.
Heather, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I without having that information right in front of me, I can't answer it right now, but I would be happy to look into it and get back to you.
Okay, I think that would be good to know. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah. We'll get that information out to all the work group members. Thank you. Go ahead, Heather.
Okay, next slide, please. So here are some more of the mandatory disclosure questions. Has the parent company owner, agent, officer previously owned or operated a health-related facility or agency? Had they had to provide care to third parties with revoked, suspended, or denied licenses? Has a parent company owner been convicted of a criminal offense involving any program under Title 18, 19, or 20 of the Social Security Act? And has the applicant or anyone with direct or indirect ownership interest in the agency been corrected of a felony? Next slide, please. So this is the example of our director of nursing agreement. This is information that they have to fill out and send to us so that we know that they have an agreement with their director of nursing to have a full-time director of nursing on board. Next slide, please. In addition, we also have requirements for the medical director agreement. They have to have a medical director and an alternate medical director. And both of these doctors must have training regarding the management and administration of nursing home as a medical director. Next slide, please. This is what one of the CMS forms that has to be turned in with the change of ownership. This is the health insurance benefit agreement. This is what they sign as their agreement with CMS. Next slide, please. The long-term care facility application, again, another CMS form, but it indicates the name, their provider number, all their street address, what type of facility they are, all that information is on this long-term care CMS form 671. Next slide, please. So we also require local permits. If the local jurisdiction requires the permits, then a copy of the permit must be submitted with the application. This includes kitchen permits, zoning permits, use and occupancy permit, and fire inspection reports. Next slide, please. We also require that we have the determination for the certificate of need, whether they need one or whether they're exempt. They have to submit that as part of their application. Next slide, please. So we also have the confirmation of the assurance of compliance to the Office of Civil Rights. We talked about the Director of Nursing agreement. They have to submit policies and procedures as stated in COMAR 10.07.02.13, 10.07.09.15. They have to submit their quality assurance plan, copy of their resident agreement, and their transfer agreement with a local hospital. Next slide, please. There's also, if they are going to continue operation of a special care unit, as we talked about earlier, either if they have a respiratory care unit or a dementia care unit, they have to submit documentation for continued operation of that, as well as evidence of financial ability to operate. Then they have a bill of sale documenting the date of the transaction, a letter of good standing from SDAT, and the workers' compensation declaration page. Next slide, please. So if they are going to continue the operation of an approved special care unit, then they have to submit the documentation that's required, that we require for special care units before they're open. So it would include, their plans, their policies, procedures, all of that would have to be submitted at the time of the CHOW application.
Physical plan for respiratory care.
If the applicant intends to establish a new respiratory care or dementia unit, we have information on our website about doing that.
Patients have to have like water cards.
Next slide, please. So this is what the child submission form looks like. As you can see at the top, the facility name before the child, the proposed name of the facility, the contact person who will be contacting to work through this child, their information. And it also lists all the attachments that need to be submitted. At the bottom, there's a box you can check to have a copy of your response sent to you. And then, and this is how you submit all the application and forms. Next slide, please. So our determination for the license, these are the determinations. So license can be approved. The license can be approved with conditions, such as requiring an applicant to use the services of a management firm, maybe require a staffing pattern or limiting admissions to the nursing home. The license can be denied if the applicant is unable to comply with all of the licensure requirements, then the applicant will be denied. The cover letter that we would issue with a denial would include instructions for an appeal. Next slide, please. So that is basically our child process and some of the forms and submissions that go along with it. My contact information is listed here, as well as Dr. Nay's. If you have any further questions, please feel free to contact us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. This is Ben Steffen. Heather, one sentinel date that struck out to me was the date of the transaction. Typically, are you getting child applications after the transaction has closed or prior to the transaction closing?
So the requirement is to submit the application 60 days before the proposed the final sale date, and a license isn't issued until we receive that bill of sale. So they would submit all the other information, the bill of sale will be in the last thing, and then that's when we would issue the license.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions for Heather?
Well, yeah, first from the work group members, we have some stakeholder questions as well. Any work group member questions?
Yes, Anna Palmisano.
Oh, hi. My question is, how are patients and families notified of an impending change of ownership, particularly if there may be changes to the services provided in dementia care and respiratory care?
So that's the responsibility of the provider to notify the families and residents of any pending upcoming sale. And if there's any changes in any services, they're required to notify them in writing.
Is that monitored in any way to ensure that? I'm just curious.
It's not something that we ask for, for evidence up front. If we would hear a concern, then we would definitely, investigate that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Solins, you have a question too.
I'm going to raise a question or an observation, but this may not be the appropriate time to ask it. I was just looking on the agenda and trying to think. The focus of this legislation in this conversation is on quality. And quality is based on the services that are delivered by the licensed entity. And what OHCQ has just outlined is a process for a change of ownership of the entity which is licensed. And certainly there is a communication step with the Planning Commission. One thing we should just, seems to me, bear in mind is that private equity has a broad definition. I don't want to get into what it is, but if you talk to people who are in real estate investment trusts, they'll talk about that they're not allowed to get involved in operations as part of becoming a REIT and other kinds of things like that. At some appropriate point, the interaction with the Planning Commission comes to the subject of CON bed rates, which can be tied to the property. I'm assuming this conversation is a conversation about the operator of the facility, but just to bear in mind, it's part of maybe more of an internal conversation at the Planning Commission about the issue of bed rights and whose information you want. So if somebody comes and says, I want to operate a nursing home in Maryland, they may be related to the owner of the property. They may not be related to the owner of the property. And if you're vetting the kind of pedigree or history of the operator, it seems to me that's the conversation we're all about here, because those are the deliverer of the services. But when those of us who do transactions also need to think about who owns the bed rights and what information needs to be disclosed relative to the bed rights, because the owner of the bed rights may have really just be treating it as an asset alone with they're not involved and responsible for delivery of services. So at the end of the day, what comes out of the other end of this process, it seems to me, would be a need for clear guidance as to whose information is being vetted. And I'm not suggesting an answer to that.
Right.
But I'm just spotlighting an issue, because when OHCQ, and the reason I picked now to raise this as a point, is that everything we've just heard, which is an extremely important conversation which OHCQ has been having and had a big webinar, is about operator. In the world of the Planning Commission, there's a bed rights conversation that occurs as well. And it seems to me, when I think of this legislation, it's focused on the quality and the background of the person who's delivering the care, as opposed to the bed rights owner. But, you know, so that's just an observation, kind of a lens through which this work group should think about.
And more to come on that issue. I think to distill it, ownership relationships in nursing homes are complicated. I think that's what I would walk away from it. I think we are aware of that, but if we can table that discussion until we move a little further into our activities, I think it's thanks for that insight.
Claudia, you had your hand up. Did you-
I had my hand up sort of as a response to some of the framing that was just laid out, because this is all related to quality. I just wanted to push back on the idea that there's this dividing line automatically between the ownership of a property and the operation of a property. I mean, I think that there's a national conversation that's happening concerning whether broadly real estate investment trusts or private equity investment models have an impact on care quality, right? So this whole conversation, I think it is really valuable, but I just don't think it's helpful to us as we really try and get down to, like, at a granular level, who is making decisions, or what kinds of financial pressures are being exerted in individual skilled nursing facilities that are a direct result of their complicated ownership structures. And Ben, I appreciate that this may be part of a conversation that we're going to dive into deeper later. I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Heather Reed before we? Or
So one point that kind of I think is worth noting is that Heather said as part of the licensure, they do inquire with MHCC about whether a determination or a CON has been issued. It's extremely rare, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's extremely rare today and over the last several years that we see a need for a CON as part of an acquisition, because to those that are experienced operators in the dark science of health planning, you know that a CON is needed if the scope of services changes. And my observation is that when these transactions occur, they're often done in a stepwise process. And when they come to us, they are mostly, their statements are that we are not changing the scope of services. Thus, it would not trigger a CON, although subsequent to the acquisition, there may be a modification in the scope of services, which would in that instance trigger a CON requirement. But over the last couple of years, I think the transactions have generally been, we're going to continue to operate it consistent with the previous owners' scope of services. Do I have that right, Jean Marie?
You have it right.
Just wanted, thank you. But it could be, but it's rare.
Don't see any more questions. Okay. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Heather.
Back to Jean Marie.
Thanks, Jean Marie. Okay, so talking about nursing home acquisitions and what other states are doing when looking at this issue of private equity. So in preparation for this work group, we wanted to take a look at other states. And this is just really a quick review of information that I found about that. So in states like New York, they've actually had their attorney general publicly support the CMS proposed rule. In California, they are taking measures to stop private equity from interfering in medical care decisions. And they have their own bill, and it's called the Patients Over Profits Act that they're working on. And then in Rhode Island, which I found to be the most progressive ideas that I was able to find in looking at this, they are actually requiring new owners to maintain a benchmark quality level at each acquired facility for 5 years. In addition to that, they're considering requiring that acquiring operators spend a certain percent of the revenue on quality of care. So those are just some ideas that are happening in other states.
And the legislation in California, is that proposed or has that been passed?
It's proposed.
Could you say a little bit more about the New York model?
I think that with the New York model, what I was able to really find was just the level of involvement with the Attorney General, getting involved really firsthand in some of the acquisitions that were going on, and just having that increased role. So supporting it publicly, talking about it, and really like working on these acquisitions with nursing homes in that state.
Just jumping in. Yep.
Wait, just 1 second. Claudia has her hand
Yeah.
up first.
Yeah.
Claudia Bielo has her hands up.
Sure. I just wanted to note that one of the things I think that that the Attorney General's office in New York is able to take advantage of is their state cost reports. Provide a lot of really detailed information, particularly in the area. They have like a notes section that discusses related party transactions, that discusses mortgage holders, and the level of detail in the data that's provided to state agencies in New York is pretty accessible. And I would argue that it's sort of the launch pad for the Attorney General's ability to start really gathering information when it comes to their enforcement actions.
And John.
Yeah, just clarity on New York. So New York is, and I agree with Claudia on the reporting requirements in New York on cost reports. That's a really good point that she makes. But what makes New York, a couple of things that makes them really unique, is that depending on the jurisdiction in the state, different ownership types are prohibited. For instance, in New York City, all of the providers are by definition non-for-profit providers. And in New York, the Attorney General currently only has the authority to involve him or herself in a transaction involving a non-for-profit provider. So what is rightfully listed in this slide is that the AG of New York supports what CMS is trying to do on transparency, which I think most people would support. But the comma is that they currently only have authority over oversight of non-for-profit transactions. But they also have local rules in New York based on different jurisdictions that require a certain type of ownership platform. Yeah, so it's important to realize it's not, they don't currently have oversight over all transactions, the AG in New York.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
We also had a comment from Senator Bidel.
Yes, Senator Bidel has made the comment that Connecticut has legislation as well, and that the AG's office has a great deal of interest in this issue.
Thank you.
Okay, this is Jean Marie. So now we're going to talk about Homer 10.24.20, which is our nursing home chapter, and acquisition rules that are in that chapter. The rules require the identity of each person with an ownership interest in the acquiring entity, the percentage of ownership interest of each such person, the history of each person's experience in ownership and operation of healthcare facilities. The acquisition rules also require an affirmation that services will not change as a result of the proposed acquisition. There's also an affirmation that there's a commitment to Medicaid participation. This is often referred to as MOUs or memorandums of understanding, and that will not change as a result of the proposed acquisition. You have to provide information on corporate structure and affiliations of the purchaser, the purchase price, the source of funds, the structure and affiliations of the purchaser. Oh, I already read that. And then they have to report the number and percentage of nursing home beds in the jurisdiction and the region and the state, what they were before and what they will be after the acquisition occurs. Next slide. Just continuing on there, this slide contains what the affirmation says on in the regulations, and the affirmation says under penalty of perjury within the last 10 years, no owner, former owner, or member of senior management or organization or current former owner or senior management of any related or affiliated entity has been convicted of a felony or crime or pleaded guilty nolo contendere and entered a best interest plea of guilty, received diversionary disposition regarding a felony or crime, and that the applicant or related affiliate entity has not paid a civil penalty in excess of $10 million that relates to the ownership or management of the healthcare facility.
And this is Stacy again. I mentioned before that Maryland Healthcare Commission began collecting some basic data on nursing home acquisitions in 2019. And that's what this is a graph of. On this slide, quality concern is defined as 1 or 2 stars on the CMS overall star rating, and a multi-bed room is a room with 3 or 4 beds. So this graph, the yellow bar shows you that total acquisitions in Maryland were increasing a little bit through 2021. And then they came down a little bit in 2022. The red bar is the number of quality concerns, and the blue bar is the multi-bedrooms. There doesn't appear so far to be any real pattern with those. And
We are getting some feedback. If you could all mute your phone for those that are on, that probably would help us here. Go ahead, Stacy.
And since 2019, 37 nursing homes have had quality issues. 30 had multi-bed rooms. Of those 30 multi-bed rooms, 9 had quality issues. And the number of nursing homes that have both multi-bed rooms and quality issues ranged from 0 to 3 per year. So far in 2023, 15 nursing homes have had quality issues so far, and 5 have had multi-bed rooms. And then of those 5, 4 had quality issues. And before we talk too much about quality, I wanted to make sure everybody has a basic understanding of the CMS 5-star rating system and the overall stars, the star score. So most of you are probably pretty familiar with the fact that CMS assigns a star rating to each nursing home. And that's generally what you're looking at is the overall star rating. And that is a scale of 1 to 5 stars, with 5 being the most optimal number. So what goes into that overall star are 3 other stars that aren't seen quite as often, but those stars or scores are the health inspections, quality measures, and a staffing star. So there's quite a few numbers and measures that go into calculating the health inspection, quality, and staffing star. They're on the same scale, 1 to 5, with 5 being the most optimal. And then again, those are used to calculate the overall star rating. So to give you a basic understanding of how it works is once you have those 3 sub-stars, you take the health inspection star or the health inspection rating, and then you add a star if the staffing rating is 4 or 5, and subtract a star if the staffing star is 1. Then you take that star that you now have and you add 1 star if the quality measure is 5 stars, subtract 1 star if the quality measure is 1 star. And then once you have that star, there are 2 rules. If their health inspection rating is 1 star, then the overall rating cannot be upgraded by more than 1 star based on their staffing and quality measure. And if a nursing home is a special focus facility that has not graduated, the maximum overall quality rating is 3 stars. So you don't need to memorize this or anything. It's just that the take home points here are that the health inspection star is a basis for the overall quality rating. And it's important to know that the health inspection star is quite important in the whole process.
And maybe you could explain, you introduced a new term, special focus facility. What does that mean?
Oh, a special focus facility is a facility that is performing very poorly on all of the above measures. And they are put on a list to be watched and assisted in improving their quality status. So it's a program that the nursing home can be put into, and hopefully they will graduate from the program and be released from restrictions. And while they're on that program, there are certain restrictions that maybe Julie has memorized, but maybe not. Okay, there are certain restrictions when you have when you're a special focus facility. There are certain restrictions to your services and how you get paid and things like that. So,
Question for you. I know the answer, but I want to get you. If I'm looking at a nursing home, say in the district and in Maryland, and each of them has a 3-star rating, can I be confident that those star ratings from different states, in this case the district in Maryland, are going to be consistent? Or
yes,
what's the mix on that? Because it's a little tricky.
The mix.
What's the rule on that?
The rule is, yes, you can compare them across states and territories. They are national calculations and they compare across states. You can compare them across states. And then there are bits of information that are calculated that are specific to the state as well. Yes, Tracy.
Are there facilities that have my math is really bad, and have 1 star
Yeah.
Yeah,
So then if they improve, I don't know, they have a good health inspection, then they can only go to then a 2-star?
Yes. Okay, yes, so so that's what that, the fourth box says. If their health inspection is a 1-star, then they can't get any better than a 2.
Then a 2, okay.
This is
how do
another reason the health inspection is a
Very
basis for this whole thing. It's very important. Yes.
John Spadaro, yeah, I just wanted to point out too, that the system is geared towards a negative rating and that you can only have, only 10% of the facilities, I believe, can be a 5-star facility, but 20% can be a 1-star facility. In addition, CMS has been continually, increasing the standards so that, things change. One day you could be X and the next day have a change because of a change in the standard, which has happened a couple of times over the last few years. So just wanted to point that out. And also, and to your point about different states, the regulatory environment is a little bit different in every state, so the enforcements are different. So there could be some nuances in that as well.
Thanks.
Somebody else have their hand up over here?
You could talk a long time about 5-star and I'll just make a few comments. It is a tool. It is a widely used tool. It is just a tool. It is, if you look at any guide to nursing homes that comes out from any source, it tells you a variety of things to look at, of which this is one. There are special factors that influence the rate at which somebody will show an improvement in their health inspection survey. Staffing is not just a metric of numerics. There's also a turnover factor, but it does not distinguish between negative turnover and positive turnover. So somebody who comes in and changes their administrator and changes their DN and changes staff because they're making positive staff will show up negatively on the staffing 5-star ranking because of staff turnover. It's in addition, if you screw up on your data reporting because of some programmatic problem or data input error, you automatically drop to a 1-star ranking on staffing. So that's not it. And again, in fairness, there are facilities who don't deliver services that we would want to see, who have low 5-star rankings, and that is important information. I'm not trying to defend poor quality of care. I'm just saying it is a tool like any tool. And that's all I have to say.
Back to Jean Marie.
okay. So we're going to talk now about the quality rating in our nursing home chapter, again, 102420. I believe this chapter, and please correct me if I'm wrong, was published in 2019. So it's pretty recent. It's a pretty recent chapter. Since I've been here, actually the whole time since the chapter was published, we've actually had 2 applicants come forward in that time. And one of them was reviewed for a certificate of need and the other one was not reviewed for a certificate of need. And we can talk about that in the next paragraph that I'm about to get into. But I like to think about the quality rating sort of in terms of layers, because there's just not one part of it, but multiple parts that people have to be able to pass in these standards. So the first part talks about at the letter of intent submission. Just pausing there, the letter of intent, it comes before the CON. So prior to someone even submitting their application. So at that time, at least 70% of all the comprehensive care facilities owned or operated by the applicant or related affiliated entity for 3 years or more have to have an average rating of 3 or more stars in the most recent 5 quarterly refreshes from which CMS data is reported. So CMS data gets reported quarterly, and we're going to look back 5 times, which is a little over a year. This is where, when I mentioned that we had one application come in that wasn't able to move forward. So right there at that part, that application was stopped because it didn't meet this first layer of regulation. And then the other one that we had did meet it and went through the whole CON process. The subparts here, in Maryland, so if the facilities are in Maryland and their operators are in Maryland, the CMS star ratings for only Maryland facilities will be used. If the applicant does not own or operate nursing homes in Maryland, the CMS star ratings for such facilities in the states in which they operate will be used. So Maryland. And having worked on, well, acquisition, we don't often get, at least from the acquisition part of it, we don't often get applicants who are out of the state of Maryland. Okay. Now going on to B. This is the second layer that comes. So now we're talking about just the applicant only, not all of them, but just the applicant who's applying for the CON. This applicant is an existing Maryland comprehensive care facility. Had an average rating star of 3 or more stars. So the same as what's above, it's just in the beginning, we're looking at 70% of all the facilities. And then the next layer, we're just looking at the applicant themselves. So that's the difference between A and B. For letter C, the applicant has to show that they have an effective program of quality assurance. And letter D refers to applicants who have never owned or operated comprehensive care facility, which is a nursing home. So that scenario isn't something that would likely happen very often, but it is there in case that situation were to occur. So I'll pause there to, any questions? Okay, this is Jean Marie again. So now we're looking at our current acquisition form / process that we use here at the commission, and we weren't able to fit the whole form on one page, so the other page goes with it as well. On a previous slide, we looked at what the state health plan requires for acquisitions. And we went through all of those regulations. So there was in December of 22, an article that was published in the Washington Post that was referred to the Porter Piccolo acquisitions of nursing homes at that time. And that article was alarming, and I think most people have probably read that article, but for us here at the commission, it was really a catalyst to look at, we don't have in our acquisition process really a mechanism to really, from a regulatory perspective, do anything about things that we see that might, be concerning or that we may want to report. However, we felt that we could bring attention to the issue. And that was really done in the spirit of wanting to inform our commissioners and inform the community, just to be transparent, to say, the acquisition is going to go through, but, here's some information that we found. And if this was a CON, this may have passed, it may not have passed. We talked about that, and we started to publish that in reports, monthly reports. So that was December of 2020, and I believe we did that right away. So I believe we started doing that at the beginning of 2021. If we could go to the second page.
And just in terms of the, this is a monthly update that really characterizes activities that the commission staff has accomplished. So it's one section of that, but it typically would state that if this applicant doesn't meet that top line measure, which is 70% held 3 years or longer, are 3 stars or higher, the observation of the staff would be if this applicant had come to us for a CON under the rules, Comar 1024 20, they would not be able to apply.
Correct. Correct. And we talk about the quality and we also talk about the standard that has to do with Medicaid with the MOUs. So that also comes up in that review as well. Both of those things.
Before you go on, Senator Bidle has her hand up.
Go ahead, Senator Bidle.
My question really has to, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you all hear me? Okay,
Yes,
thank
we
you.
can hear you.
I'm in the car, so it's a little difficult. But my question really has to do with when you talk about the ownership, what I'm hearing is companies like Puerto Rico don't own the property or have someone else, another company managing the property, another company providing all the supplies as vendors, and you know how the real estate is owned and who manages it are all separate entities. Are you finding all those entities by this acquisition form, or are they totally separate ownership and you're not able to connect those?
Okay, I think I heard most of your question, Senator. So with our acquisitions, we really look at three things. We look at the owner of the real property, we look at the owner of the bed rights, and we look at the operator of the facility. And all three of those things are things that we vet as part of our process. Because in an acquisition, any of those things can change. So you may have an acquisition where only the real estate is changing. You may have one where only the operator is changing. So any of those scenarios can be possible, but we do look at all three of those separately.
Thank you.
Commissioner Boyle has her hand up.
Thank you. Since the commission has been making information available since December 2020, I think it was, you said, on change of ownership that then would not be subject to a CON. I certainly have been raising my hand just about every meeting saying, well, we have these facilities and they probably would not qualify for a CON if they were applying for, a new facility rather than a change of ownership. So is this group going to look into looking at the commission's, healthcare commission's authority that perhaps changing it, that a CON would be required for a change of ownership?
So I can take a stab at answering that question. So, one of the things that's in this state bill that we're looking at, one of the changes would be that there would be a summary letter that the Maryland Healthcare Commission would write and send to OHCQ. So that collaboration between us here at the commission and OHCQ already happens. We already collaborate with each other in terms of their CHALS acquisition. Those are just two terms really for the same process. We already do that. What's different is it would be sort of a summary of our findings, and then that information would be shared with the health secretary, and health secretary could then take action against a nursing home's license. And that would be what the change would be.
The language formalized something that occurred and gave further direction to the health department, but it did not really modify the processes that MHCC currently employs in terms of assessing the character and fitness. This work group could recommend, I think, as we work through this set of issues, whether additional requirements would be appropriate. I note that the report does go back to the legislature, and I think it's realistic to expect that some additional action could be forthcoming in a future legislative session.
Thank you.
Okay, so just continuing on about what our current process is. So this slide is an addendum to the acquisition form that we're looking at. And each entity gets listed on that form. And it says, you know, the name and then the percent of ownership. And then describing the role, so which each person's experience, you know, is there. So the applicant fills out this information for us, and that's where we get information to do our analysis. So I'm going to just briefly talk about what we do currently here at the commission when these come in. So the first thing that we do is we look at nursing home compare. We look at star ratings. We look at star ratings for all the facilities, not just the facilities in Maryland. We look at all of them. So sometimes that's quite a big undertaking. Some of these.
You're talking about ownership for the applicant, the purchaser, or the.
Yeah, so.
Say all, you're talking about those owned by the individual who's come forward to get a determination, correct?
Right, and I guess what's different is if this was a certificate of need and it was an operator in Maryland, we would only look at Maryland. What's different when we look at acquisitions is that we're looking at all states. So if they have facilities in other states, we were looking at that too. When we began this process, that was a choice that our director had made just to get, I think the goal was just to get the most information available to share. So that's our current process. We take a look at the date the data was uploaded. We note that. We look at flags. We talked about the special focus facility flags. There is another flag for abuse. So we note that as well. If the facility has that flag, then we will include it in our report that goes in the monthly report to the commission. We do share that information. We also note the date that the facility was last acquired. The next thing that we do is we look at a site called Pacer. What Pacer is public access to court electronic records, and it has, you know, everything from bankruptcies to HR issues. It can have all sorts of things. And what we're really looking for is something that would be significant, something that would qualify, you know, for concern. Certainly you're going to have issues with just operating businesses with these things coming up, but we're looking for something of substance there to see. So we do that, and we look at individual names. So if we get names on this form, we use names. We also take a look at the facility as well. So we do both of those things. We look at the OIG exclusions list. We look at the MOU for facilities. We look at that in comparison to the health planning region and the county. And we get updates to those rates, those percentages every year. So we look at those to see if the facility has an MOU, we want to make sure that it's the benchmark is being achieved. Not all facilities have MOUs in Maryland, but the ones that do, and we would note that as well in our report that we put together for the commission. And then lastly, we look at multiple bedrooms. And that's really more for a data, just tracking purposes. We're trying to look at the data, you know, that we've been tracking and make correlations between things. And so we started tracking multiple rooms as well to see if there would be a correlation between acquisitions or quality or any of those things. And I think the more data, we've only been doing it since 2021, and then we have OHCQ's data, which is 2019. So I think the more data we get, you know, certainly the more information that we'll have. So that's what our current process is, and I can pause there for any.
One clarification, Jean Marie. So currently, we don't have any authority to stop an acquisition that has multi-bedrooms. But if that same applicant came to us, otherwise a stellar performance, 3 stars or higher, but they said we're going to have half of the facility with triple bedded rooms, what would we do?
So if they were coming to us for a new CON, that would not apply.
We would not permit.
We would not, and that applies to the new COM, but it also applies to waiver beds as well. And we have had that come up with waiver beds where if they're applying for that 10% or 10 beds, whichever is higher, if that facility doesn't make a reduction, like in that process, if they can't demonstrate that they are making progress towards getting rid of those rooms, we can hold that up as well. And we have, that has happened with facilities who have requested that.
Thanks.
That is the information. Oh, I want to point out that the articles that Jean Marie has been referencing are all on the website, which is a link that I sent to everybody. It's our work group website. All of those articles are on there along with the agenda. The meeting recording will go up there within about a week. And any other, the slides will also be there after this meeting. Oh, actually, no, they're already up there. Okay. So make sure you bookmark that. If you forgot about it, it's in an email from me, Stacy House, so you can search your email for it. That is all the information that we have to share with you. We're trying to schedule the next meeting for late July, early August, and we have invited a guest speaker, Atul Gupta, who is an expert in private equity. He's going to discuss private equity and how it affects nursing homes and nursing home quality.
And we probably are going to have a second speaker. We haven't nailed down that person yet that will talk broadly about investment in the nursing home sector in general. I think observers who've been engaged in this industry for a while know that there are a host of challenges currently accelerated by the pandemic. Kind of in passing, Jean Marie referenced the 77% occupancy that we estimate is on average what facilities in Maryland are experiencing. Operators can respond about whether 77% is a good number if you're an operator to have 77% occupancy or lower. Probably not a good place to be. So, there's certainly that presents some opportunities as we think about, changing the triple and quad bed rules. The facilities in general are not that crowded, but it also does demonstrate a kind of a factor on the stress the industry is probably under. Hope to have somebody who can talk more generally about what are the options for reinvestment. So we should pause here. I think I kind of shut down some of the stakeholder comment during the meeting. We'll pause here for any additional comments from stakeholders. And one person in the room, Howard Solins.
Just one comment about occupancy levels. Obviously, there's lagging data relative to the COVID pandemic, but also the impact of staffing. I'll just observe, I don't know the experience in Maryland, but we have a national practice, and I will tell you that occupancy around the country in nursing homes is adversely affected by the absence of staff and facilities. The expectation of facilities and of government and of advocates is that if you don't have the staff, you should be delivering services. So there are people who are turning away certain types of patients who require heavy staffing, or just raw numbers of patients. And there is an issue of patients backing up in hospitals because of lack of access. So occupancy is not necessarily a function of demand or of need. It's just a part of the reality of staffing challenges as one factor. I just, the other thing I will just make as a general comment, as I did my earlier one. There's a difference between Maryland is rigorous in its oversight of nursing homes. If you look at the data nationally in terms of citations of deficiencies and the vigor and rigor with which Maryland approaches things, Maryland is very, very strong in terms of its regulatory oversight. There is a natural instinct to slow the process down and be vigilant about and have high standards, which we should have for who is coming in and acquiring nursing homes. On the other hand, bear in mind the question of what happens if a nursing home needs to change ownership. And then there is not someone ready, willing, and able. What is the alternative? Is it closure of the nursing home? Is it lack of resources? Is it adverse effect? So I just would, as we aspire for the quality we all aspire to, everybody in this room is committed, fiercely committed to quality of care, and I believe I am, others can judge or not, but expect a certain behavior and you'll get it. You know, in terms of what regulatory process is, what is the effect, not just on who is acquiring the facilities, but the facilities that are subject to the ownership change process as well. Because there are people in those facilities and families who are affected by that. And sometimes time is of the essence. Every situation is different. So thanks for the chance to at least hop on a soapbox for a minute, but thank you.
Anyone else on the line?
Jan. Okay.
So the meeting minutes, was this meeting recorded?
Was, yes.
We didn't actually tell you all that.
No, it was a screen.
Oh, okay.
It was a pop-up.
All right, so you did see that. The meeting recording and the meeting summary will be available.
On the website and within a week. And I'll also send out the meeting summary.
And you will receive a online survey on the next meeting, correct? That's the way we will count that.
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. I will give you back about 10 minutes of your day and appreciate everyone's attention. This is an important issue, lots of different moving parts here. I want to thank our colleagues at OHCQ for their presentation and the staff of MHCC for all the work that's been done over the past month and a half in preparation for this. I think we hope to make some good headway, and your attention is critical to that success. Thank you very much. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you all. Good meeting.
Glad you came.